If you've ever been slightly curious about anarchism, you've probably noticed it's not easy to find a simple anarchist. You'll likely encounter anarcho-syndicalists, anarcho-capitalists, or anarcho-communists. Just the tip of the iceberg. The sheer variety of anarchist currents can be overwhelming. That's why we're creating this video, to explore almost all of them, from the most well-known to the most obscure. We'll help you understand the nuanced differences, even between seemingly similar branches like anarcho-primitivism and vegan anarchism. Our goal is to delve into the ideology that prioritizes freedom above all else, and sometimes falls to the extremes. But before we explore the labyrinth of anarchist thought, let's establish the core principles that unite this diverse movement. Every political movement and ideology comes with its share of stereotypes and misconceptions. But anarchism seems to suffer from them the most. After all, what does anarchy mean in everyday understanding? Chaos, disorder, and complete lawlessness. In reality, anarchists are the fiercest opponents of anarchy, if by anarchy we mean a complete lack of order. They believe in a highly organized society, free from hierarchical power structures. This requires a level of self-discipline, awareness, and responsibility that many would find daunting. According to anarchists, the state is the primary obstacle to freedom. It claims a monopoly on violence and imposes its will on its citizens. The existence of the state is often justified by the claim that freedom arises from the basic order it provides. In other words, the state prevents Hobbes's war of all against all, allowing us to go about our lives in peace. But anarchism offers a completely different thesis. It argues that the best order can only emerge from freedom. As Anselm Balaguer writes in the first manifesto of anarchism, anarchy is order, while the state is civil war. For anarchism, the state is a repressive organ that suppresses individual and collective freedom and perpetrates artificial inequality. Yet for most of us living within the paradigm of the state as the norm, the idea of life without it, however flawed it may be, is terrifying. We imagine ourselves in a real-life version of the purge, where unchecked aggression and brutality reign. To this, anarchism responds with a well-known argument by Nicholas Walter. Many people say that the government is necessary because some men cannot be trusted to look after themselves. But anarchists say that government is harmful because no man can be trusted to look after anyone else. Anarchists critique not only the state but also other institutions that they see as oppressive, such as traditional education, marriage, prisons, and organized religion. They advocate for a society based on voluntary cooperation and mutual aid. Many anarchists also reject democracy as it's commonly practiced. They argue that representative democracy is a form of alienation, in which individuals delegate their power to elected officials. But what would an anarchist society look like? How would it function? These are complex questions with no easy answers. When did anarchism emerge? Some trace its roots to ancient Chinese Daoists and Greek Stoics, while attempts to build anarchic communities are scattered through history, for instance among Christian communities during the Reformation. However, these are more sources of inspirations for true anarchists, such as this notable figure. William Godwin is considered one of the founders of philosophical anarchism. However, for a long time he remained overshadowed by more famous individuals, including his wife Mary Wollstonecraft, one of the founders of feminism, and his daughter Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. Interestingly, Godwin never called himself an anarchist, as in his time the term was more of an insult used by political opponents. Yet his inquiry concerning political justice became one of the first anarchist programs. Godwin argued that government is inherently corrupt and oppressive, and that society would be better off without it. Yet his views are labeled philosophical anarchism for a reason. He also argued that the state is currently a necessary evil and must be dismantled gradually through education and progress. His cautious approach was influenced by the excesses of the French Revolution. The first person to proudly call himself an anarchist was Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. He coined the famous phrase, "Property is theft." By this, Proudhon referred to property obtained without labor. He criticized the capitalism of his time, where workers created goods but received minimal returns, while capitalists seemingly stole the fruits of their labor. At the same time, he did not advocate for the abolition of all property. His other famous quote, "Property is freedom," refers to property acquired without exploitation. Proudhon proposed an alternative vision of capitalism in which independent producers would exchange their products and credits through a people's bank. Essentially, this was a model of capitalism for small-scale producers. Interestingly, the term for his ideas, mutualism, was borrowed from French utopians, who had previously attempted to implement this system. Proudhon's ideas might remind you of socialists and communists. This is not surprising, given the close development of anarchism alongside other leftist ideologies in the 19th century. However, this connection applies exclusively to leftist branches of anarchism, collectively referred as social anarchism. In contrast, there exists a right-wing vector, individualist anarchism. Yes, once again, right versus left. Both right and left-wing anarchists champion freedom and equality. But for right-wing anarchists, the emphasis is on individual freedom and equality, where their left-wing anarchists believe that freedom and equality can only be realized within a community, a small yet social group. Unsurprisingly, leftists tend to be more critical of private property and capitalism. Let's begin with the left-wing anarchists. Anarcho-communists advocate for shared means and results of production. Their principle, from each according to their ability to each according to their need, might sound familiar. They even participated in the First International but clashed with Marxists. The primary point of contention was anarcho-communist rejection of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Why replace one form of oppression with another, as well as the state ownership? After all, who needs a state? Key anarcho-communist theorists include Italian Carlo Cafiero and Enrico Malatesta, as well as Russian geologist and writer Pyotr Kropotkin. The most famous Ukrainian anarchist, Nestor Makhno, was also inspired by this idea and tried to implement it during the Ukrainian War of Independence. If not for Russian communist forces, who knows? Maybe today we'd be learning the history of the first anarchist state. Similar to anarcho-communism, but with a slightly different emphasis on individual ownership. In other words, from each according to their ability to each according to their contribution. Anarcho-collectivism was popular in the 19th century, but eventually gave way to anarcho-communism. Notable anarcho-collectivists include James Guillon and Mikhail Bakunin. Bakunin is often regarded as one of the most influential anarchist theorists, despite his nationalist pan-Slavist view and anti-Semitism. While earlier forms of anarchism advocated for organizing people primarily based on territorial principles, anarcho-syndicalism proposes professional organization through trade unions. Anarcho-syndicalism became a significant part of the labor movement in the early 20th century and still exists today in the form of International Workers' Association. The black cat, often seen in syndicalist symbolism, represents sabotage, a common method of their struggle. Anarcho-pacifists advocate for non-violence, considering civil disobedience the best way to resist the state. This philosophy is encapsulated in American thinker Henry David Thoreau's essay, Civil Disobedience, written after spending a night in jail for refusing to pay a poll tax. Though Thoreau was not an anarchist, his slogan, "The government is best which governs least," aligns with anarchist ideals. In contrast, insurrectionary anarchism endorses propaganda by the deed, using active violence to achieve its aims. Italian anarchists were particularly active in this movement, assassinating figures such as the French president, the Spanish prime minister, the Austrian empress, and the Italian king in the late 19th century. These actions contributed to the stereotype of anarchists as dangerous criminals. As you can imagine, not all anarcho-pacifists or insurrectionary anarchists belong to the left-wing tradition of anarchism. It's now time to explore the currents of right-wing anarchism. Left-wing anarchism seeks to liberate communities from state control and the ills of capitalism. Right-wing anarchism conversely prioritizes individual freedom from societal constraints and moral obligations. That is, no one owes anything to anyone. Egoist anarchism, pioneered by Max Turner, elevates selfishness to a virtue. He argued that individuals should unite only when it serves their personal interest, forming what he called unions of egoists. While he was critical of the state, he was more tolerant of it than many other anarchists, as long as it didn't infringe upon individual liberty. Although Turner was relatively unknown during his lifetime, today he is regarded as precursor to nihilism. Illegalism took Turner's ideas to an extreme. Illegalists, such as members of the Bona Gang, saw crime as a means of liberating themselves from societal constraints. They rejected both the state and traditional morality, often engaging in acts of violence and theft. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. How does illegalism differ from plain criminality, besides the fancy name? Remember Proudhon's famous phrase, "property is theft"? Anarcho-capitalists agree, if we're talking about the state or collective property. They believe such ownership disrupts the balance of free market and spontaneous order. Until now, we've discussed anarchists who vehemently criticize capitalism or were indifferent towards it. In contrast, anarcho-capitalists view the market system as natural and optimal for humans, arguing that when each individual strives to increase their profit, they contribute to the overall well-being of humanity. ANCAP is often compared to libertarianism. The difference? Libertarianism retains state ownership for security and law enforcement, whether ANCAP proposes privatizing even these functions, relying on competing private security firms and courts. Murray Rothbard sums it up well. Capitalism is the fullest expression of anarchism, and anarchism is the fullest expression of capitalism. Not only are they compatible, but you can't really have one without the other. True anarchism will be capitalism, and true capitalism will be anarchism. Closely related to ANCAP is agorism, which revolves around the concept of the agora, a voluntary free market. Like ANCAP, it envisions independent courts and arbitration. And the state? Samuel Edward Conking III, the founder of agorism, proposed a creative solution. Ignore the state and undermine it through the gray and black markets of goods, services, and labor. So next time you receive payment under the table, consider this. You've just taken a step toward the agora. The morality of such behavior is yours to judge. Just don't dial the taxman. So far, we've covered the classical branches of anarchism. But anarchism extends far beyond these, as many movements draw inspiration from issues beyond economics. For instance, eco-anarchism or green anarchism focuses on addressing urgent environmental challenges through an anarchistic lens. Classical green anarchism is closely associated with Murray Bookchin and his theory of social ecology. According to this theory, the social and political structure of society is reflected in its attitude toward nature. Consequently, if people exploit each other, they won't hesitate to exploit the environment. Bookchin proposes a new communal order that would free people from capitalism and nature from humanity itself. Vegan anarchists take this step further, advocating for the liberation not only in nature but also animals, creatures humans exploit, kill, and consume. As Brian Dominic writes in Animal Liberation and Social Revolution, I am vegan because I have compassion for animals. I am anarchist because I have the same compassion for humans. Another notable current of green anarchism is primitivism. Primitivists believe that humanity made a grave mistake when it abandoned the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and that historians lie when they claim that civilization was a blessing. The only solution, they argue, is to return to the Golden Age. Agro-anarchists, while not as extreme, propose simply abandoning the Industrial Revolution and returning to living in agrarian communities. Essentially, it's a variation of anarcho-primitivism. The most famous adherent to this trend is Theodor Kaczynski, better known as Una Bomber, a promising scholar who abandoned his career and moved to the woods. He sent bombs to businessmen and scientists for many years. He was imprisoned until his death in 2023. Other branches of anarchism focus on issues of gender and the body. For example, anarcha-feminism links the liberation of women from patriarchal oppression with the liberation of all people from the state coercion and sometimes capitalism. Similarly, queer anarchism advocates for gender and sexual freedom, challenges stereotypes about non-binary individuals, and reimagines institutions like marriage and family. What about embracing nature, living in free communities, and going naked? Anarcho-naturism proposes something like that. While it's rare today, it had its movement in early 20th century Europe. On the opposite end of the spectrum are anarcho-transhumanists, who rejects the idea of returning to nature entirely. After all, true freedom is not only economic, political, or sexual, but also biological. For anarcho-transhumanists, liberation means transcending the limitation of the human body. They question the very concept of humanity as a biological species, supporting digital consciousness or body enhancement via implants. Down with the dictatorship of genes. While anarchism is generally incompatible with nationalism and most anarchists are critical of organized religion, there are a few notable examples where anarchist principles intersect with ethnic or religious ideas. For example, national anarchism advocates for the development of the nation, but not in the form of centralized state, but rather through the use of anarchist federations. National anarchists are disliked by other anarchists, and researcher Spencer Sunshine even considers them latent fascists, as racism and white chauvinism are prevalent among them. Independence anarchism advocates for national liberation from a foreign state. The most prominent example is Catalan anarchists, who advocate for the independence of Catalonia, which would allow them to realize their anarchist ideals. This is reminiscent of post-colonial anarchism. The term post-colonial anarchism encompasses a wide variety of anarchisms that have developed in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, often borrowing from local traditions that resemble classical anarchism. They oppose Eurocentrism and link anarchism to liberation from colonial legacies. The same applies to religious anarchism, which combines the dogmas of certain religions with the principles of anarchy. Christian anarchism is most often mentioned, facilitated by the large number of sects within Christianity, especially Protestantism. In the modern world, thanks to globalization and the advent of the internet, several new anarchist movements have emerged that don't fit into any of the traditional categories. Arguably, the most fascinating is crypto-anarchism, which seeks to achieve personal freedom through modern technologies. It's believed that the digital world can undermine the power of the state and the classical economy. Not everyone aims to change the world through the internet. Some just want to watch shows for free and download games from torrents. Info-anarchism isn't exactly a political ideology, but it highlights the diversity of modern anarchist trends, which increasingly blur into subcultures. This blending of ideology and lifestyle gave rise to anarcho-punks. More than just punk enthusiasts, they became part of broader Antifa movement, which now includes various anarchist groups. Anarcho-punks are typically aligned with leftist strains of anarchism, such as anarcho-communism, syndicalism, and collectivism, and they often practice civil disobedience as propaganda by deed. The peak of anarcho-punk activity was in 70s and 90s, but it declined alongside punk culture itself. In the 90s, during academic debates, the concept of lifestyle anarchism emerged. This term describes anarchists who focus solely on personal freedom, without engaging in broader societal change, essentially not contributing to the collective anarchist cause. Anarchists are big on self-organization, and while we're not anarchists, we do love community engagement. So don't forget to like and share this video with your friends and leave a comment. If for some anarchism has become a lifestyle, for others it has become a source of theoretical inspiration. Post-anarchism refers to use of concepts and arguments of classical anarchists in contemporary social criticism. The term was coined by the American essayist Hakim Bey in his article Post-Anarchism Anarchy. Post-anarchism should not be confused with post-left anarchism, first mentioned by the publicist Bob Black in his book Anarchy After Leftism. Post-left anarchism is a heterogeneous phenomenon that emerges in response to the critics of left-wing ideas after the collapse of the USSR, and the desire of anarchists to rethink their own ideas. As Jason McQueen writes, "Leftism is dead. Long live anarchy." We hope that despite the differences between the various branches of anarchism, you have seen what unites them: the desire for freedom and the freedom to choose one's way of life. The means of achieving this ideal can vary, individually or collectively, through peaceful means or through force. For the end, we save the so-called anarchism without adjectives. This idea emphasizes that the conflicts and differences between various branches of anarchism distract from their shared goal and only serve to divide anarchists. Back in the late 19th century, the Spanish anarchist Ricardo Mella called for the pure and simple anarchism without any prefixes, which would not only advocate for human freedom, but also freedom within anarchism itself. Now it's a time for a special treat, a brief overview of some bizarre, hypothetical, and outright impossible form of anarchism. Brace yourself, because understanding this might make your head spin. In short, this is monarchy without a state, where a king or queen acts as a guarantor of anarchism, ruling but not governing. There is even a collection of essays with this title, though based on the description it seems to miss the mark entirely. If you're an anarcho-monarchist, please share your ideas with us and we'll pin them in the comments. We've already mentioned how some view national anarchists as a fascist in disguise. Well, Jonas Nilsson decided not to hide it and directly titled his book Anarcho-fascism: Nature Reborn. Right at the start he writes, "The concept of anarcho-fascism was born while I was writing my political science thesis. Libertarianism meets authoritarianism, the fusion of fascism and anarchy." No comment. Sure, some anarchists identify as Satanists, but in our view, that's hardly enough to establish a standalone branch. Oddly enough, there is a book on Amazon that includes the phrase anarcho-totalitarian in its title, The Anarcho-Totalitarian Nature of Radical Environmentalism. We hope it's just a metaphor, but who knows? And that concludes our journey. If you have comments, corrections, or insights about anarchism, feel free to share them below. We're not immune to mistakes. Don't forget to let us know what other political ideologies, phenomena, or issues you'd like us to cover in the future videos. See you next time, and as always, stay away from the extremes.